Men in black are closely tied to the world of the unknown, showing up in or around sightings of UFOs or other unnatural beings in the sky. UFO sightings will have follow-ups by these men in black, either showing up on the doorstep of the witness or even in public places to scare them away from the subject matter. They are often tall, bald, and wearing dark suits. Their clothing is crisp and clean, as if they work for an agency. Theories of what they are just as diverse as their associated descriptions. Some claim they are alien beings themselves or undercover government agents. Some have even claimed that they are cyborgs created by government experimentation. They are considered uncanny and do not seem right, like a human, even having bright red lips, as if trying to blend in and look as human as possible. Others have said they are just men who seem unfeeling, aloof, but otherwise normal. They often come out of the woodwork when people are loud about their discoveries. From novels to websites and even news reporters have all been affected by the men in blacks, as they are so often called. Their sightings can be described as terrifying and bone-chilling, as they can be aggressive or have strange, robotic mannerisms. Overall, people seem to agree that these men in black are scary, and they want something. What it is remains a mystery. But before we go ahead and get into tonight's encounters, be sure to go ahead and slap that subscribe button for storytelling of the mysterious and supernatural 7 days a week. Let's do it. Years ago, an anonymous U.S. postal carrier in Washington, D.C. was out on his usual route, doing his expected mail delivery. The worker had stopped to have a snack before continuing his course through the town. After the postman ate his apple or food, he needed to find somewhere to throw out the apple core. He did not see a trash can nearby, so he decided to throw out the apple onto a lawn nearby. He thought nothing of the act as he went back onto his route, but was surprised by the guard inside the building he had just entered to drop off the mail, upsetting him for throwing the apple on the lawn. The guard simply explained how the area was under very high surveillance and that he should not have thrown the apple core away in such a manner. The mailman was stunned by such outrage from the guard, since he was just inside the building to drop off some mail, and it seemed like just any other building of business. He continued on his route. He questioned the building more and more. It was strange, and such an unsuspecting building would need that much security, even watching the lawn around it. The strangeness of the building clouds the postman's mind. It was no longer a familiar place of business. However, he was quickly pulled from his thoughts when he saw 2 strange men walking toward the building. Or somewhat. Instead of 3 walked, they shuffled side to side as if they weren't sure how a person was supposed to walk. They were unusually tall and rail thin. Something he would say was the scariest part of seeing these men in black. The postman wrecked his nerves. He was almost too frightened to deliver the mail as he was supposed to. The man decided he needed to finish the job. He had to buck up and go inside and drop off the mail no matter how scared or frightened he was of whatever was waiting for him inside. He wrote it off as simply his imagination and buzzed himself into the building. It was crowded with men. Not just the 2 from earlier, but several others, and they looked at the postman and then they began to ask him if he had seen anything. They asked him accusingly. He felt scared and felt threatened by the strange characters as they accosted him. The postman assured them that he saw nothing and was dropping off the mail. Then one of the men in black walked up behind him, and he could feel the very hair on his body stand on end. He was terrified. His heart was pounding as he approached him. He looked at him, but tried his best not to turn and look at him. The other men asked him again if he saw anything. He stumbled upon his words, and quickly he said he had not seen a thing. The postman felt like he was trapped in a life-or-death situation with these men in black. Like robots, they stared him down before finally telling him to leave. The anonymous storyteller explains that the fear was so strong, he felt a sudden urge to leave the country and never return. He did not know what was happening in that building, but he knew it was not normal. Now a few weeks go by, and he would mysteriously be placed on a new route without warning, but that was not enough. Finally, he decides his best course of action is to leave his job with the United States Postal Service. If you think you are safe from men in black, think again. Because even among friends, Telling the tale of a close encounter can somehow summon them to you. An unusual life form contacted a man who goes by the name of Larry. The aliens had infiltrated his dreams, telling him that he was not from Earth himself, but a distant planet. He simply did not believe it. He even asked for proof that the entity was more than just a telepathic thought. The entity agreed, and the entity told him it would appear before him when Larry was with his best friend. He wouldn't think of this, though, for months. His friend was a military member and often would go long periods without seeing one another. He was shocked by what they had both encountered together that day that he did. It was the week of Independence Day, and they were enjoying some time at a park with their family to celebrate the holiday. The two young men were chatting. Larry wasn't even thinking about his strange encounter months prior to this day, and out of nowhere, a large black van pulls up on the road not far away from them in full view. It was a surprise for them both when two tall men opened the dark van's door. They were dressed strangely, extremely out of place in the hot summer sun in the park. They had nice suits, hats, sunglasses, and were dressed more like business people than a couple who came to enjoy the park. They were not wholly human upon further examination. Larry claims he could not pinpoint what they did to not exactly look human, but there was just something about them. They just had something that deep down told him that it was wrong. Something was off. The men sat down at a picnic table, all turned around to stare down Larry. He could not understand why. It was unnerving. His buddy became quiet, and then the men stood up, turned around, and walked away. Larry claims that this encounter still terrifies him to this day. Even his military buddy will not discuss it. In Cumberland, when Jim Templeton took his daughter for a drive, he did not expect his life to be changed entirely. That day in late May, Jim Templeton had taken his 5-year-old daughter out to Burrow Marsh from their home in Cumberland. They were all alone in a large field, except for a couple of elderly women sitting in their car a few feet away. Like any other father, he wanted to capture a few memories of his daughter and began to take pictures. He only took 3, and when he finally got them developed, something shocking could be seen in the background. A prominent white human figure was towering behind her. It wore a spacesuit like what NASA wore at the time, and he seemed to be peeking over the young girl's shoulder at the camera. Templeton would insist on its authenticity. Even Kodak confirmed that the old photograph was genuine. He took it to the police, who claimed it was not suspicious. He went to the local Cumberland newspaper. When that failed, then it blew up and traveled around the world in the pre-internet age. But that was not the end of his story. After the photo had made rounds, 2 men in dark suits approached Templeton's home. The 2 men claimed that they had worked for the government, yet they would not give him a name or proof that they were whom they claimed. Instead, they stated that they went by numbers only. Templeton led them to the site of the photographs, showing them where it was. However, when he explained that the figure did not exist when he took the picture, they became angry. They left quickly, driving off without Templeton forcing him to walk home alone. Harold Dahl was a harbor officer working in Puget Sound, off the shore of Murray Island in Washington state. His encounter on a small boat with a dog and a young boy would change UFOlogy forever. They were gathering logs when they suddenly saw 6 donut-shaped crafts above their boat. Their amazement was quickly turned into terror as one of the giant machines began to descend rapidly to the earth. They had fallen around 1,500 feet, causing the large metal to scatter all over in a rain around them. The debris scattered so wildly that Dahl's son was hit by some of the pieces that rained down on the dog, who unfortunately could not make it to shores with the others. Dahl gathered up the camera he had brought with him and took pictures of the chaos around them. Later, he took the photos to his supervisor, Fred Chrisman, who refused to believe such a thing had happened, but he went out to check anyway. The sighting was shocking. It was exactly as he had seen in the photograph. A large aircraft was right where Dahl had told him. The following day, he was called on by a man in a black suit. Dahl and the man went to a local diner where the man in black began to explain what he knew. The man knew everything Dahl had seen that day, from the large fragments of the crash and debris, even the passing of their dog, which had shocked Dahl. When the man told him something more concerning, that bad things would happen if he said anything about the incident. The government would later claim that the whole incident, of course, was a hoax, and the 2 men, Dahl and Crimson, would later agree that it was a hoax. But conspiracies still fuel the fire of what truly happened that day in June. Their story was the beginning of the Men in Black stories, and they seem to continue with every UFO or alien sighting all around the world. A UFO researcher named Jack Robinson and his wife reported their encounters with the eerie Men in Black themselves. He would claim that there was a man in a black suit who would stand outside of their apartment. It was not just outside their home that they were being harassed. They would often come home to their things strewn about. Jack's UFO files would be touched or moved, and they were both frightened, so they turned to their friend, Tim Green Beckley. On the third day of harassment, Tim was brave enough to approach the Man in Black and take his picture. This photograph is considered by some the most definitive proof of Men in Black, since it's considered authentic. The Men in Black may have started with Harold Dahl's encounter, but the idea was shot into the world with Albert Bender's incredible tale. Albert K. Bender was a man of eccentricity. He was a collector of the strange and supernatural, which turned his life into the path of fascination with UFOs, especially since he was living in a time of flying saucer sightings in the 1940s. This seemed to, of course, pop up all over the western United States. It became such an exciting and vital part of his life that he was prompted to create a UFO organization that would be the inspiration for many others in the years to follow it. It was called the International Flying Saucer Bureau, and would be the start of the strange things in his life. The group soon became 600 strong, led by the Dr. Bender himself. The headquarters were in his own home. They would have a journal sent to their members filled with UFO sightings and theories on what they could have been. It wasn't long after the organization's creation that Albert would begin to have strange occurrences all around him. He had terrible health, messages would be projected into his mind, and he would often have phone calls he could not explain. He was terrified, and to make matters worse, he swore that someone or something was watching him at all times. The idea would be solidified when he was at a local movie theater one evening. He had noticed a man watching him, but it wasn't like any man. It was tall and had glowing red eyes. On his way back home, someone was following him in the shadows all the way home. He went inside in panic, terrified of whatever was lurking behind him. The terror did not end there. He reported yet another incident where he was being communicated via telepathy and hypnosis. Albert even claimed that whoever was harassing him had levitated him from his own bed, and a foul smell had filled the attic, a burning sulfur smell. To connect things, whatever beings were attacking him, he started to gather his people in the IFSB to make a psychic connection with them. On March 15, 1953, he would open a telepathic message, calling occupants of interplanetary craft that have been observing our planet Earth. We of IFSB wish to make contact with you. We are your friends. However, Albert's message changed nothing. His house continued to smell like sulfur. He was telepathically ordered to stop interfering with matters that did not involve him. Everything seemed to come to a head in July. Albert was visited by 3 men he described as clergymen, but wore strange styled clothing. He claimed that they floated off the floor and their faces were not discernible as their hats hid their faces. They were terrifying to Bender. They felt as if they were burning his skin just being in their presence. The men did not say a word. Instead, they telepathically told him to stop publishing. Before they left, the men removed all the journals they could find. The visits would be repeated over the years, and one encounter he would describe them as slowly materializing in his room. Several dark shapes stood before him, and slowly he saw the men in black suits and black hats appear. He could not believe his eyes. All the strange interactions and a bit of encouragement from the men in black compelled Albert to stop all investigations into the world of the unknown. Later, he would advise his successors over the years to be very careful, for they may encounter the men in black themselves. One of the more frightening parts of the men in black is that the United States government claims that they have no idea who or what these agents are. They say that though, right? The United States Air Force has said that they were interested in who these strange men are. To the government, it is essential to find out who these men are. If the men indeed are not from the government, they would be committing a federal offense by posing as officials from the government to scare civilians from telling their stories. The trail to these cases is often dead by the time they get told, and it has been a challenging task to track the mysterious men in black. It was early January when the Christiansen family had returned home from their vacation in Florida. They had moved into a new home after their own UFO encounters since November. To combat the constant sightings, their address and phone number went unlisted. Only close family members knew where they had gone. And it was not until the evening that they had received a knock on the front door. Mrs. Christiansen was in the kitchen cooking dinner and asked her 7-year-old daughter to see who it was from the window to check if it was a salesman or not. The little girl would be surprised as it was a very strange-looking man. Mrs. Christiansen opened her front door, shocked to see the man walking up to her house. It was freezing cold, yet there was no car to be seen other than their own. It was growing darker as the winter evening began to settle in. It was a bizarre sight, as they had no immediate neighbors and it would not be safe to travel to their home by walking at any time of the year. The tall man stood in front of her and asked for Mrs. Christiansen. He claimed to be from a division of government called the Missing Heirs Bureau. It was the strange man in black's claim that her husband may have had an unexpected inheritance from a distant family member. Looking back, she was naive to allow him into her home, but that is precisely what she did. Mrs. Christiansen called out to her husband. Her husband was quite tall, around 6 feet, but the man that had entered into their home towered over him. He had to have been at least 6'6" and was extremely wide. His clothes were even far more strange. The man had a fur-covered hat with a visor, but the jacket he wore was much too thin for the cold weather that they were having. His hair was trimmed extremely short, almost entirely bare-shaved. It was dark. Then the next strangest thing was that his eyes bulged peculiarly. One eye even seemed to not move at the same time as the other. Mr. Christiansen assured the stranger that he did not have anyone who would have left him a large sum of money for any reason, yet the stranger insisted on asking him some questions. To prove his point, the man showed a badge that the young daughter would say looked to be gold or brass, but unlike a police badge, it had a K with an X that crossed to the bottom of the K. He only flashed the badge a moment before tucking it away to hide it from their sight again. The man removed his dark coat, revealing a short-sleeved shirt and dark pants. The most interesting part was a long wire that ran underneath the man's pants. The man was so pale that the family had thought the man was sickly. His voice was even stranger, robotic and inhuman. He said things as if he had memorized them word for word. The only name they could remember her mentioning was Tiny. He sat down in their living room, and Mrs. Christiansen offered for the man to join them for dinner, but he had refused. The so-called Tiny claimed that he was on a diet, but specified he would need water in precisely 10 minutes. This struck Mrs. Christiansen as strange. The man began to ask Mr. Christiansen weird, bizarre questions. Questions about birthmarks and scars and how long they were there, where they were, how they got there. The questions began to get more and more weird over time. As he interviewed them, the man's face began to drain and change in color. His face was red and got darker and lighter as they spoke. Eventually, he asked for the glass of water again, and he took out a large yellow capsule and swallowed it, returning to normal again. The whole process was finished within 40 minutes of his arrival at their home. Tiny would tell them that he would contact them if anything had turned out for him in the next 10 days. Mrs. Christiansen decided to watch for him as he left, curious about how he had arrived in the first place. She said that as he walked, his feet kind of squished slightly with every step. They only ever heard from him again when Mr. Christiansen received a phone call regarding his supposed inheritance investigation where a woman said that they had found the correct Mr. Christiansen in California. Shane Solar had one of the more recent encounters with the Men in Black, or instead his coworkers did. The actor Dan Aykroyd had his encounter with the Men in Black while filming the new paranormal-themed television show. At the time, he was having a phone call with another celebrity who would be appearing on the Saturday Night Live with him when he noticed a man staring him down across the street. He was standing next to a large black van and continued to keep eye contact with Dan. It lined up perfectly. Dan had been an avid UFO hobbyist for years and wanted to share his fascination with the world. But he knew that the man in black watching him might not be a reality. He wanted to continue with the show, but when he contacted the producers sometime later, he learned that the show purchased by a network was canceled with no explanation. They had an entire first season ready to air, but the plug was pulled at the last minute. Some say it was just an executive decision, while others believe that the MIB intimidated the executives to bury the videos away. The production company has not released the series and does not seem to be going public anytime soon. Amy Rylance was having a peaceful gathering with her husband Keith and Petra, her friend, at their home in Australia. As the evening began to wind down, Amy had fallen asleep on the couch while her husband went to their bedroom to sleep, and her friend went to the guest room. The night was filled with thunder as a violent storm hit the area. This caused Petra to wake up and walk into the living room to check on Amy. What she saw was shocking and was the tip of the iceberg for the small group. She was in complete shock when she noticed that her friend was being lifted in her sleep out of a window by a large disc-shaped object. Petra rushed to the other room, waking Keith up from his sleep, panicked by the strangeness she had just seen and not sure how to explain it. By the time they had made it into the room, Amy and the craft were gone, leaving broken glass in their wake. Keith did not hesitate to rush outside to look for his wife, searching everywhere for any sign she may have still been there. But there was nothing. Keith could only call the police. Despite the strange images Petra had described to him of UFOs and his wife floating out of the window, when the police arrived, they also saw no sign of Amy. They searched the entire property, trying to find any evidence of her whereabouts. Near the window was a flowered bush that seemed to have curled and twisted by some form of high heat. Everything continued to spiral down the rabbit hole when Keith received a phone call from a woman. She was at a gas station, and Amy was wandering around in a confused trance, speaking gibberish nonsense. She was dehydrated and drained. That is when Keith learned where she was. She was 500 miles away from their home. To make things even more weird, this all happened in an hour and a half, and it would have taken about an 8-hour drive to get there. The police in that town were soon involved, bringing Amy to the local hospital where she began to remember more of what happened. She was in a bright room where a man's voice had soothed her from a panic attack, and a tall, slim figure walked in from a doorway in a full bodysuit and a black face covering. The figure informed her that they were finished with what they needed of her and were returning her to where she had come. She awoke in the wilderness and wandered to a gas station where she was found. Amy also was revealed to have markings on her body, triangular lines and red stains on her skin. Her hair grew all over her body as she had been gone for weeks rather than a few hours. A blood test showed that Amy was utterly stone cold sober despite her wild story. It was later that they would encounter the men in black. They had hired a group of professional UFO experts to their home to study the house and any evidence around it. One was Diane Harrison of the Australian UFO Research Network, and the other was a UFOologist named Bill Chalker. They would explain that dogs partially caused the damage to the property and that the nearby flowering plant was often susceptible to sun damage. The investigation only brought more questions for the researchers. These questions and concerns caused hesitation from the researchers, though Harrison did believe the witnesses had seen something from another world that night. While the UFOologist explored the property, Amy, Petra, and Keith stayed in a hotel. Harrison would try to contact the group but would not receive an answer. They were gone when they went to the hotel to check up on them. Keith would call Harrison and explain what had happened, and Keith explained that a sizable four-wheeled truck was following them around. They were terrified and did their best to escape. In this instance, the group did not physically view the men in the vehicle, but the sizable dark color matches many other witness accounts of the Men in Black encounters. These contactees have not been heard since they no longer do interviews or discuss the story, but perhaps someday they will. As with many contactees, once is never enough. If you guys enjoyed today's episode, be sure to go ahead and smack that like button and leave a comment down below because I would love to know your thoughts and theories on Men in Black and what are they? Are they real or are they just a terrifying hoax? Also, if you're new to the channel, be sure to go ahead and smack that big ol' red subscribe button right down here and keep your notifications turned on so that way YouTube will let you know every time I release a great new video. As always, guys, I love you all. Keep an open mind, and I'll see you guys in the very next video.